All right, good morning, everyone. Or I should say good afternoon. The day's getting by with me. Welcome to the Legal Lens. Of course, for those of you that have been with us before, on Tuesdays and Wednesdays of every week, we have the Legal Lens where we talk about different legal issues that people are interested in. But for the month of June, we have decided to make it a month to celebrate Pride. So this month, we've had some phenomenal speakers that are members of the LGBTQ community that have come on to talk about their experiences, and we believe that we've certainly saved the best for last. Today, we welcome Mayor Annise Parker, CEO of the Victory Fund. If you don't know who she is, shame on you, regardless of whether you're on the LGBT community or not. But we're going to talk to Mayor Parker about her experiences, all of her accomplishments, the many things that she continues to do to this day. And hopefully it'll serve as an inspiration to many of you out there. Mayor Parker, thank you so much for joining us today.
Very happy to be with you, and glad to close out your Pride Month series.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm glad Pride Month is over. I've done a lot of speaking engagements. The only good news is I haven't had to travel.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think it's everybody has contained themselves in their spots, but has done everything that they can do. Well, Mayor Parker, again, thank you so much for just a quick blurb. I mean, we can spend 2 days talking about your resume, where you're from, and what your life has been like. But so the viewers are out there understand. Give us some of the high points of where you're from, what you've done, and where you're at today.
So I'm a Houstonian. Both my parents were born in Houston. I grew up out in Spring Branch when it was cows and horse pastures. A long time ago. Actually, you could stand in the back pasture of my grandparents' farm, which was out on Brittmore Road, which is just past the Beltway, and you could see all the way to downtown because there wasn't anything between you and downtown. I'm a graduate of Rice University here in Houston, and I spent 20 years working in the oil and gas industry before I was elected to office, and then 18 years full-time public life, 3 terms council, 3 terms controller, and then 3 terms as mayor of Houston. I tried several things after I left office. It was difficult to find my rhythm after all that time in office. Uh, 2 years I taught at Rice University in their political science department. And I also, at the same time, worked at Baker Ripley, which is a wonderful, amazing nonprofit here in Houston. But 2.5 years ago, and actually, I've been out of office 4.5 years now. 2.5 years ago, I became president and CEO of the Victory, and it is two halves. It is Victory Fund, which is a national PAC, and Victory Institute, which is a C3. We're a unique organization. Next year we'll be 30 years old, but we only work with those in the LGBTQ community. Victory Fund only endorses LGBTQ candidates. So we're the only organization that does that. We love our allies, but that's not our mission. And we're also the only organization, political organization, that is every level of the ballot, every state. It's actually kind of funny when you think about it, but there's a mosquito control board in South Florida that's actually an elected position, and all the way up to this year we had a presidential candidate, and everything in between.
That's right.
So I have enjoyed my time at Victory. The fund endorses candidates. The institute does candidate training and helps people prepare to run for office, and then provides a network of support for openly LGBT public officials, and both elected and appointed.
Let me ask you this, Mayor. I mean, of course, we're in Pride Month. Um, this month has been a big part of it, Black Lives Matter. And then that spins off the narrative of, well, all lives matter, right? Or then last year, I think there was a straight pride parade in certain parts of the country. So the question becomes, from those people that aren't necessarily marginalized or in the minority group, you know, why would we need that? Why would we need to have an LGBTQ candidate? Why can't it just be a candidate? Why is the focus? What's the impetus for that? What's the real reason we need that?
So I get asked that a lot, and I hear flack usually from the far right. We're a bipartisan organization, actually, and we don't do lobbying, we don't do policy. We're about LGBTQ candidates wherever they fall on the political spectrum. But I hear a lot of criticism from the right. Why does identity matter?
Sure.
My identity does matter. It doesn't mean that I can't be well represented by an ally, someone who understands my life, but no one can represent me as well as I can. And the diversity of the LGBT community, the range of experiences that we have within the LGBTQ community means that it's important to be represented to be able to speak for ourselves. There are currently just under 850 openly LGBT leaders serving. I mean, I'm not on the list anymore. Victory maintains a map, and if you do an internet search, it's out for America, and it'll show you every current LGBT official of whom we are aware, and we're every state, as I said, all levels, but we are 0.16% of the elected officials across America. If we're 4.5% of the population, we need to elect almost 23,000 more to achieve parity. When our democracy is stronger, when it reflects all of us.
Exactly.
And if you're a Hamilton fan and you want to be in the room where it happens,
Yeah.
the more diversity we have in the room where it happens, where decisions are made, the better those decisions are at addressing the needs of the majority of Americans. We've been spending at Victory, we have a lot of strong LGBTQ elected leaders who are people of color. And one of the best ways to be an ally, and a lot of what we talk about during Pride Month is how to be a good ally to the LGBTQ community. Well, I'm going to talk about how to be a good ally in general. And one of the ways is if you have a microphone or a megaphone, stand aside and hand it to somebody else who could say the same thing, but from their own lived experience. And that's what we've been trying to do for the Black Lives Matter movement, that our activities, we've most of our, either the fund or the Institute, most of our public facing conversations have been about putting our candidates of color and our office holders of color, particularly African American, front and center so they can talk about what's happening in their cities. There's an interesting connection. The Houstonians who might be watching this know that George Floyd was from Houston. He's now buried in Houston. I had the honor of being invited to attend his funeral service in Houston. The district where he was murdered, the council district where he was murdered in Minneapolis, is represented by a Black trans woman. Her name is Andrea Jenkins. Victory Institute has a year-long program that's called the Victory Empowerment Fellowship, and we send 12 candidates who might have extra challenges through this year-long mentorship program. Andrea Jenkins went through our program. It's for candidates of color and trans candidates. Minneapolis actually has a man by the name of Philippe Cunningham, a male trans council member as well. Both of them went through our year-long empowerment fellowship. Both of them went through the Institute's candidate and campaign training to learn how to run for office after they went through the mentorship program. We endorsed both of them on the fund side, and we helped them get elected. 2 years ago, we just kept watching Andrea and how she was working, and we have another leadership program that, thanks to really amazing donor, the Bonnet Foundation, we were able to send 6 people to a Harvard leadership program. Obscure council member in Minneapolis, we picked her to send to this 3-week leadership program at Harvard. Not because we had any idea that a year and a half later, her city would be going up in flames, but because we felt that she had the leadership qualities that we as a community should be investing in. And if you have seen her public interviews and the work that she's doing to both address the pain of her Black constituents, but also to try to keep her city together in her role as a public official, it's it's a it's difficult to watch, but it's a masterclass in what public service is, and that's the work we do at Victory.
Sure, sure. No, I can't, I have a bunch of family members that are lawyers, and the older generation and us younger generations started going to law school, and so many of the women in my family started to go. And their experience where there's still not that many of us. Now there's more women or ladies in law school than there are men. We have 3 females that are Supreme Court justices, hopefully more one day. And I can't help but I try to make that argument. People say, well, Randy, why is this really important, right? And not just that for me, but it's also, we've had people that have talked the past few weeks, a serviceman who was gay, and he said, I was scared to death because I didn't know that there were others. I thought I was alone. Another surgeon who said, in the 80s, as physicians, we're taught that there are certain diseases, ailments that are specific to cultures, to race, he said, and those issues for gay, lesbian women were not even addressed in medical school. We didn't know how to offer particular care. So I think it is important, right? Because if you have this particular experience and skill set, you're not only empathetic and you know what those people go through, you're prepared, but also as a young kid growing up in McAllen, Texas, you say, here is someone who has faced those obstacles and is able to do what I want to do and be happy, right?
It's the ability to face challenges and overcome that's important, but it's also that just the life experiences are so different. Here's another factoid. The state, California, Washington, and Oregon, in one chamber or the other, there's is led by an out lesbian. Tina Kotek, Speaker Jenkins, and in California, it's Tony Atkins, who's who runs the Senate. And we actually hosted a conversation with the 3 of them talking about how they ascended to leadership in their legislative bodies, but also being, just as women legislators over the years, the different things they work on. And I was listening to Tony Atkins talk about it when she was actually in the House before in leadership. She's actually, I think, the only person in California history that's been the Speaker of both houses there. The legislature is really, really good. But that she had to author bills for that treatment of breast cancer under insurance policies in California. And that finally got it through, but you couldn't be treated for breast cancer more than once. Okay, I'm sorry. Every woman I know knows you actually have 2 breasts, but let's have another conversation.
Sure, yeah. That's
so, and then Leslie Herod, who is a state representative in Colorado, started a movement among a lot of state reps across the country in this last year. We started focusing on equal treatment or fair treatment of women who are incarcerated, that menstrual products are considered luxury items that you have to pay for. There's nothing comparable for men. But it took a woman in the legislature to say, really, we're charging women extra for
Yeah.
this. Is this fair? Let's change the law, and then share with her sister legislators across the country. That's why when I say those are two extreme examples of just you think about things differently.
Yeah. Cindy, did you? I know that I'm sure that that's probably split off some questions in your head.
I actually, I love what, and was reading about what Victory does. I wonder how you get your name out there and how people get in touch with you if they're interested in getting into politics. Because I think particularly in today's culture, people are afraid of how you're dragged through the mud in politics in general. So can you talk a little bit about how someone who might be interested, who's gay, lesbian, interested in getting into politics but fearful, what advice would you offer, and how could they get in touch with you? With Victory?
So Victory has a website, has two websites, victoryfund.org and victoryinstitute.org. And if you go to either one, it will refer you to the other. And a lot of people are nervous about politics. I mean, I've been on the ballot 11 times. I understand politics is a blood sport.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing genteel about politics. It's tough, and it is not for everyone. But an amazing thing happened in 2018. More women, more candidates of color, more LGBT candidates ran than ever in American history by an order of magnitude. And a lot of them were first-time candidates. And it's, a lot of things have changed in America since the 2016 election. But I think what was happening is that people all across the country were looking around and saying, I'm not happy with politics. I'm not happy with what I see in leadership. And they waited for someone else to step up, and no one did. And so then they said, I'm going to do this myself. And they're running and winning. At Victory, we called 2018 the year of the rainbow wave. More LGBT candidates than we know what to do with. This year, it's the rainbow tsunami because it just kept growing. It grew through, and other organizations in the progressive political space, like Emily's List, have seen exactly the same thing. A lot of these people are first-time candidates, which the good news, bad news. It is not brain surgery, but there are techniques that you can learn to be a better candidate. And if they're willing to learn, there's a lot of organizations that can provide that training. Since we only work with LGBTQ candidates, we do a first-class training, but you can get an equivalent training from an Emily's List, which works with Democratic women. You can get an equivalent training. There's groups that work with Republican women. And I would say that 90% of the training you get from some of these big political organizations is exactly the same. It's the nuts and bolts of politicking. What's different is how you wrap your own narrative into your campaign, how you weave your life story and the experiences into the platform and the plans that you have for your constituents. And for LGBTQ candidates, that is often a challenge. And there are sort of right ways and wrong ways. We only endorse candidates who are open about who they are. But there's we also don't ask everybody to, put an L on the forehead either. So there's a way to do it, and that's what they learn from us. But and running in Houston is a big city. As mayor of Houston, I had more constituents than the governors of 15 states. We don't think about how big the city of Houston is as the fourth largest city in the United States, just in terms of population. But a lot of these first-time candidates are running in smaller races. They're running in school board races and state house races and in little tiny cities. Victory just helped elect uh, a young trans woman. She's in her 20s, Rosemary Ketchum. She is now a council member in Wheeling, West Virginia.
Wow.
You wouldn't think you'd be electing an openly trans woman in Wheeling, West Virginia. And if you go on to the Victory Fund website, you can find out about her and nearly 300 candidates who we're working with this year on the ballot. It's tough, it's hard. A lot of people don't want to do it, but I'm telling you that a lot of people have realized they have to do it if they want things to change. And it's amazing to watch.
What advice do you give those newcomers who are entertaining the idea of taking your advice and putting themselves out there? How do you not internalize the mass criticism that is certainly to follow?
Well, I have to say that I'm glad I started before the Twitter and social media era.
Right?
I was elected first in '97, and that was a long time ago, and it was before all this. You have to recognize that, first of all, social media is not the real world, and the hardest lesson in politics is it's simple, but it's a hard lesson to internalize. Happy people do not show up to tell you they are happy. Happy people don't spend an afternoon coming down to a city council meeting to tell you they are happy. Happy people don't drive to Austin to show up at your hearing on XYZ law because they're happy. They show up because they are angry or because they are afraid. So what you see and what you're exposed to is those who are angry or afraid or upset. And you have to go into it with the mindset that the person who's in front of me is important, and there may be real issues there and they deserve a hearing, but they're not the only voice. And you have to be able to step back and realize that there are a lot of other voices out there. The other thing, and that I've worked with a lot of candidates over the years, that I advise that you really need to know who you are and why you're there. One of the really frustrating things for me over the years, particularly when I was teaching, and I got all of the budding politicians, college students who I'm going to run. They would come up to me, I want to run for office someday. I want your advice. And depending on what kind of mood I was in, how polite I would be, but no one cares that you want to run for office. I want to know what you want to do. A political office is not a destination, it is a tool. And you need to know what you're going to do with a tool before you take it in your hand. And so the advice is to figure out what your passion is, what you want to work on, and then you have to find the position that will allow you to do that work. I served on council with some really good guys, but they were elected to Houston City Council because I could get elected to council. They really wanted to be in Congress. And they were terrible council members because city council is about trash pickup and potholes and barking dogs. I was a civic club president before I became a council member. I loved potholes and barking dogs and trash pickup and working on that. But they were miserable because they wanted to do foreign policy. Figure out where you want to be, and then go for that. But recognize that you are generally you're gonna get the negative. So you have to be really sure that you're in the right place and that you're working on issues that matter. And it's harder and harder to do as we live more and more in the social media era. And the other thing that's changed profoundly, I was elected 22 years ago for the first time, something like that, 23 years ago.
Ahead of your time.
Kathy Whitmire, the only other woman mayor of Houston, was really ahead of her time, but this was prior to the social media era, and it's also, a big change is that there is no such thing as a private moment in a public place for any of us, but most especially for a public official. Just about every human being on the planet has a cell phone, but that cell phone is a recording device. And there is what used to be able to have a public persona and a private persona, and there was the public facade and who you really were. You cannot do that anymore, and you haven't been able to do that for a long time. But at the same time, I think people have become much more forgiving of, I don't care if you did something stupid in high school and you got arrested for shoplifting and went to jail. I really don't care if you got a DWI when you were in college. Most people don't. You smoked pot. But your adult life matters still. And you have to be aware of that. And so if you're thinking about entering politics, every time I campaign and every time I was on the ballot, the very first thing I spent money on is I hired an Oppo researcher to research myself, just to see what was out there.
I don't need that. My stuff's all
sometimes, and I didn't feel like I had any secrets, but but actually, there's so much bad stuff, just garbage that gets out there too. And it's not that you can't, and it's not that you can't survive. Again, most people don't care. There's sort of a before adulthood and after adulthood that we get cut slack. But even if you had a horrible mistake or you did something as an adult, if you address it appropriately and you, as I said, put it into your narrative and own it, people respect that.
It's truthful. Yeah.
That they like that. They want to see integrity. They want to see honesty. And for a lot of people who are afraid, people won't vote for me because if I come out that I'm openly LGBT. Well, first of all, we've been electing LGBT people in America since the mid-'70s, and there's 850 folks out there right now who are serving in office who will tell you that that's not true. But we've done a lot of surveys and conversations with folks, and for a lot of folks, even those who don't understand or actively disapprove of those who are openly LGBT, what we hear over and over again is that I appreciate that they are honest. And if they're honest about something that I so disapprove of, I bet I can trust them about other things too.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll give them a chance.
Sure. Mayor Parker, we've been talking the past few minutes about there's sort of been this moment of people saying, I'm fed up, right? There's been this point reached of critical mass, you said in 2018. And I think right now this month with Black Lives Matter, clearly we're seeing this energy, this charge. Black people, but other disenfranchised groups, right? So my question to you becomes, at some point I can't help but think that most politicians get to that point. What was it for you? What made you say, okay, I want to run for office and there's something that I want to change? What was it for you?
I was a lesbian activist in college. I have a Wikipedia page. There's no secrets. I'm 64 years old. I graduated college in Houston, 1978, and my first LGBT organizing event was in 75. I know you had a speaker last week, Phyllis Fry. I met Phyllis Fry in 1976. I was a baby back then. And I was one of the founders of the Student Association at Rice in the 70s. And when I graduated, I went to work in the oil industry because that was 80% of the Houston economy, and that's where you got jobs. But I threw myself into LGBT activism, And I did that for about 10 years. And then, you know, you grow up, you get other interests. I threw myself into, I was a homeowner, and I was involved in civic associations, and I threw myself into that for another 10 years. And what I kept seeing is the things I was passionate about in wanting to change the world as someone who's openly LGBT and as someone who cared deeply about the city, that from both sides of my activism, I kept running up against the city and thinking, well, I could do better than that. Or why can't they fix that? Or I've been working to get that abandoned property demolished for the last 5 years as a civic club president. Why the heck can't they get taken care of? And at the same time, you know, why am I still seeing the police department harassing people during a bar raid during Pride Month? So again, I just kept coming back up into the city. I didn't grow up wanting to be in politics. I'm very introverted. I am painfully shy, and I battle social anxiety. And I think it's important to talk about that because people don't believe that you can be in politics with with all those descriptors. But it was worth it to me to go through what I consider every campaign I've ever run I would do a root canal every day rather than most of what I have to do during a campaign, like call strangers and ask for money. But the job itself, it was absolutely fascinating. And I had a good job in the oil industry for 20 years, but when my time in office, I was eager to go to work every day. I won't say every day was a good day. I had some bad days, but I was eager for the challenge every day. And it was just absolutely priceless. I loved the opportunity. But I want to come back to talking about the moment we're in right now. Protests are important. Protests call attention to a problem. Protests are an opportunity to vent, to grieve, to say they're a cry for help. They're a sign that something needs to be addressed and something can be wrong. But a protest is a moment. That protest can be part of a movement. And as we're saying with Black Lives Matter, it is a larger movement. But the reason that we're still dealing with issues in the African American community that we've been dealing with for decades and generations is that protests are important, the movement is important. You have to have someone in the room casting votes, writing the legislation that change things. And then once you have the laws in place, they're only as good as the people who enforce them. And you need both. So taking us back to your really first question, why is it important? You have to have both. And what we in the LGBTQ community have seen, just as I think the African American community has seen over the last, they've been dealing with this for much longer, but we've seen, I think a lot of us 5 years ago, we got marriage and we thought, well, okay, I don't have to fight as hard anymore. We've reached this milestone. And maybe last week when the Supreme Court ruled on employment and we said, okay, we can serve in the military and we have marriage and we can't be fired simply because we're LGBT. We've achieved so many things on the agenda, we can relax. That's not how it works. Because they can be unwound or undermined and undone. And there's still a lot of things that need to be fixed. But laws are only as good as people respecting them, agreeing to abide by them, and then the people who enforce them. And they can so many of these rights can be undone. You were going to ask a question.
Yes, Mayor Parker, we have actually some questions coming in on Facebook for you.
Tanner Luna asked, how do you feel about the use of executive orders by county judges? And can a governor issue a binding judicial opinion?
Okay, first of all, I am not a lawyer, happily. There's plenty of other lawyers on this call. And I will say that I think both Mayor Turner and County Judge Hidalgo did an absolutely exemplary job at the beginning of this pandemic, taking really, really tough decisions to keep us safe. I think Governor Abbott fumbled the ball, and the fact that he forbade local elected officials. You know, I love it when conservatives talk about they believe in local control until they don't. That they now, all Judge Hidalgo can do is urge folks to do the things that she could order previously. And there is a reason that we had originally given that power to local elected officials. County officials are the emergency management leads in a crisis. And because they're closest to the ground, they see what's happening, and they are most accountable to the people. So I think she did an excellent job at the beginning, and I think it's sad that there's the lack of leadership at the state level, and not just lack of leadership, but the fact that he actively intervened and is no longer allowing local elected officials to exercise their executive authority is a significant problem.
Agreed.
Elizabeth Power asked, while you were mayor, what was your proudest moment?
I get asked that a lot, and I always laugh. I also have, my wife and I have been together, it'll be 30 years next year, and we have 4 kids. And don't ask me which one of my kids that I like the best. You know, you got to be careful. So, but I am the hardest thing that I'm proud of. We did a vast expansion of parks and green space, and I'll have this, like, it's like a little guilty secret. When I drive through the city and I see the hike and bike trails that are going in along the bios, and I'll do this kind of, I did that.
Yeah, the dog park, we all love the dog park.
You know, that's. I mean, I really do love the expansion of the hike and bike trails, and we did a lot of work on green space. But from a political standpoint, and what is really necessary for the city of Houston, the first year I was in office, I hiked water rates 30%. Nobody likes to pay more, but we had for decades not invested in the water sewer system because nobody was willing to go in and hike water rates. That same year in the fall, I went to the voters and asked for the voters to impose a drainage fee on themselves. Now, that drainage fee generated about $100 million a year. $100 million sounds like a lot. I had like $3 billion worth of street and drainage projects, so that kind of puts it in proportion. There's 6,000 lane miles of road in the city of Houston, and about that same amount of water and sewer pipes. And at $1 million a mile, $100 million doesn't go very far. But from the standpoint of going in my first year and saying, what are the 2 hardest things I could do, and what is the thing that needs to be fixed most? Do the hard thing as early as you can. So hiking the water sewer rates and getting council to agree, and then getting council and the voters to agree to put a drainage fee on. That's probably the thing I'm proudest of, because it was so necessary. But the fun is the parks and green space.
Kid Vicious asked, what makes Houston the best city?
Well, you know, every mayor will tell you that their city is the best city. And it's kind of hard for me to be objective because this is my hometown and I love it. But I mean, sometimes you have to kind of stretch a little bit. I loved it when we had that kind of bootleg theme for Houston. Houston, it's worth it. It didn't come from the Chamber of Commerce, didn't come from the city, but Houston, it's worth it. Mosquitoes as big as hummingbirds, but Houston, it's worth it. You know, roaches that you can put a saddle on and ride, but Houston, it's worth it. That it's the best thing about Houston is the people of Houston, and that it sounds really trite, but it's not just the people, it's the attitude. There is no real reason to have the fourth largest city in the United States here, where it is. Nobody discovered gold here. Actually, we're the headquarters of world oil and gas. There weren't any oil and gas wells here. Those were in East Texas. We're largely here because in 1900 a hurricane wiped out Galveston, which was the premier city on the Gulf Coast, and they came inland to get away from the hurricanes. And the railroads brought the tracks down this far. When we were founded, every year we'd lose at least 1/10 of the population, sometimes more, to yellow fever. I mean, the weather was the same in 1836 as it is now, but people stayed, and they kept coming. And there's this Houstonians, we attract some of the best and the brightest from around the world, and there is an attitude that we don't. I'm trying to figure out how to say this. I used to say this a lot, and I've gotten a little out of practice. But you know, there's an expression that about tell me who your people are. We don't care who your people are. We don't care where you came from, what your original language was. We want to know who you are and what you can do. And that is what is the best, most exciting, most sustaining thing about Houston, is the fact that you can become a Houstonian the day you arrive, as long as you have the right attitude. And we have been proving that over and over and over again for decades. And it's still true. Doesn't mean we don't have problems, doesn't mean we can't do better, but that open, welcoming, we're going to give you a chance. Come on in. I'll tell you, I'm throwing out random factoids. Here's one for Women's History Month. So I was the first openly LGBT mayor of any major American city. In fact, of any top 100 city, I was the first. But of the top 10 cities, I was only the 10th woman in American history to lead one of the top 10 cities.
Wow.
There've now been 12. Half of us were women mayors of Texas cities. 2 in Houston, 2 in San Antonio, 2 in Dallas. New York's never had a woman mayor. Los Angeles has never had a woman mayor. Chicago just elected its second. Philly's never had one. What is it about Texas? Well, I mean, a lot of the big cities are here, but the fact that we've done a better job of electing women to these top executive positions than places with much more liberal track record. And it's a little bit about what I just described about Houston. It's also been true in Texas, that in the early days of Texas, everybody was from someplace else. Show me what you can do. I'm gonna look at you. I'm not gonna look where you came from, or what your last name is, or what your language is. Show me what you can do. That's a long answer.
Really a great way to segue into our sad goodbye. This has been such a true pleasure, and wish you would run for office again. But Randy, would you like to?
I might.
I think you should. Close it out, Randy?
Yeah, I would say thank you so much. Thank you for
Really?
speaking with us today at the end of Pride Month, and talking about a little bit of your amazing experiences, and please continue to do what you do. And I agree. I think the more, Houston's an example, but the more inclusive we are from our candidates, the more experiences we have, we're able to create a better life for all of us, not just a certain segment of the population. So thank you for being with us, and we appreciate it. Please keep up the hard work and stay around.
Thank you.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
Such a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye. I think we have